So let's talk about Angola. It's a country with a story that's just full of contradictions. I mean, how does a nation become one of the fastest growing economies in the entire world right after clawing its way out of one of Africa's longest and most brutal civil wars? It's a fascinating story of incredible wealth that's literally built on the ashes of conflict.
And to really get a sense of the scale of this change, look at this number. Between 2001 and 2010, Angola's economy grew at an average of 11.1% every single year. For a whole decade, that wasn't just fast, it was the fastest economic growth rate on the planet. Just an absolutely staggering explosion of wealth.
And that, right there, is the central question. This economic boom didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It happened in a country that was still, clearing landmines and rebuilding entire cities from scratch. So how in the world did Angola pull this off? And what's the real story hiding behind those incredible numbers?
To find the answer, we've got to go back, way back. You see, Angola's modern story wasn't just shaped by its recent history. It was forged in centuries of conflict, stretching from colonization all the way to its fight for freedom.
This timeline really puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? After hundreds of years of Portuguese rule, a tough war for independence kicks off in 1961. They finally win in 1975, but there were no victory parades, no peace. Instead, the country plunged straight into a civil war that would tear it apart for 27 long, brutal years. It only finally ended in 2002.
And you have to understand, the Angolan Civil War was never just a local fight. It was a classic Cold War battleground, a global tug-of-war. On one side, you had the ruling party, the MPLA, getting support from the Soviet Union and Cuba. And on the other side, you had insurgent groups, UNITA and the FNLA, being backed by the United States and apartheid-era South Africa. The world's biggest powers were all pouring fuel on this fight.
The human cost of this decades-long war was just immense. Millions of people were forced to run from their homes in the countryside, all trying to find safety in the capital city, Luanda. They ended up settling in these huge shanty towns known as musequas, which just ballooned with people, creating a massive humanitarian crisis that really defined the city for a generation.
But then, in 2002, the guns fell silent. The war was over. And with peace came the chance to finally unlock Angola's most valuable asset, something that had been waiting just off its coast. This is where the story takes a massive turn.
And here it is. This is the engine that powered that whole post-war boom, oil and diamonds. I mean, look at that. Together they make up a whopping 60% of Angola's economy and pretty much all of its export money. After 2002, production went through the roof. Right at the same time, global oil prices were surging. It was the perfect storm for an economic explosion.
Now, a really key player in all this was China. While a lot of Western countries were a bit hesitant, China just jumped right in with these massive oil for infrastructure deals. They offered a $2 billion loan back in 2004. The deal was basically, in exchange for future oil, Chinese companies came in and rebuilt everything: roads, bridges, hospitals. And just like that, they became Angola's most important economic partner, by far.
So, we've got peace, we've got an oil boom, and we've got massive reconstruction. It all sounds like a perfect success story, right? Well, there's a much darker side to all this progress. Turns out, the incredible wealth flooding into the country wasn't exactly reaching everyone.
Just take a second to read this quote from Human Rights Watch. $32 billion with a B just disappeared from government accounts, and that was in just 4 years. This points to a gigantic, mind-boggling corruption problem where the country's own wealth was being siphoned off on an industrial scale.
And don't think this is some ancient history. As recently as 2020, the Luanda Leaks investigation blew the lid off how billions were allegedly funneled from state-owned companies straight into the personal pockets of the ruling elite. This even included the family of the former president, who had been in power for 38 years. This table right here, it perfectly captures the paradox of modern Angola. Look, the country ranks a pretty respectable 58th in the world for its total economic output. But then, look at its rank on the Human Development Index. That's a measure of things like health, education, and standard of living. It's all the way down at 148th. This is the very definition of a country that's wealthy, but its people are not well off.
So what does that inequality actually look like for real people? Well, it's grim. Life expectancy is one of the lowest in the world. Infant mortality is one of the highest. The country has a Gini index over 51, which basically means there's extreme wealth disparity. And if you live in a rural area, you're almost 3 times as likely to be in poverty than someone in a city. That oil money just never trickled down.
So the big question is, where does Angola go from here? The country is really at a crossroads, facing these huge challenges that are going to define its future and decide whether it can ever become a truly fair society.
The path forward is pretty clear, but it's not going to be easy. First, they have to diversify the economy away from just oil. Second, Angola has tons of fertile land but only uses about 3% of it. Developing agriculture is a no-brainer. Third, that oil money needs to be invested in people, in their health, in their education. And finally, none of that is even possible without getting serious about tackling corruption.
And that leaves us with this final, massive question. Angola's story is still being written. It has all the resources it needs to create a prosperous, healthy nation for every single one of its citizens. But the real challenge is whether it can finally overcome the ghosts of its past and make sure that its incredible wealth becomes a blessing for everyone and not just a treasure for a select few.